Thank you all for joining us. We apologize for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties, but we're here. And so that's what matters. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, my name is Erasma Beras-Monticciolo, and I am your host for Powering Up with Power of Two Facebook Live series. So today marks the 1-year anniversary of our broadcast. And as part of today's episode, we wanted to do a retrospective of past conversations. With the backdrop of the global pandemic, the many lives lost and the many lives changed as a result, the divisiveness that was permeating our nation and the racial reckoning, we at Power of Two wanted to create a space in which we could really engage directly with community leaders, both formal and informal, residents and advocates, to highlight not just the pressing issues impacting our communities, but also the innovative solutions that the communities themselves were designing in order to engage in collective healing and recovery. Many of the topics that we've discussed over the past year are ever more pressing now, and as we have learned, are all interconnected. We can't talk about homelessness without talking about the homeless industrial complex. We can't talk about health without talking about how racism affects all aspects of healthcare, from the resources that are available in particular communities to our experiences in the doctor's office, or the impact that environmental racism and police brutality has on our bodies and on our psyche. We also can't talk about education without acknowledging that racial inequity is baked into our nation's educational system, and that our Black and brown children face the most extreme hurdles to academic success. However, what this past year has also taught us is that we are at an inflection point as a community, as a city, as a nation, and that holistic, integrated, inclusive, and transparent approaches is what's going to help us heal and recover. Our guest today, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, is a proud Brownsville, Brooklyn native, a licensed attorney, and a mother. And she has made a name for herself as a strong voice and advocate for the 55th Assembly District in New York State Legislature. Assemblywoman Walker has dedicated her life's work to advocacy and has joined us today to reflect on this past year and to share her vision for our communities. Assemblywoman Walker, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Erasma, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully all of our systems are a go and audio's clear. I'm hearing you loud and clear, and I thought that was an amazing introduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, as part of every broadcast, we always ask, a very important question, because I believe that folks really need to know and want to know. And the question is, why did you choose the path of public service?
Oh, wow. Great question. So, really, Councilwoman Alika was the one who was really into the political arena. All I ever wanted to do was be an entertainment lawyer. And I worked while in law school and afterwards. I did some personal injury, which I love trial work and litigation. I love the law. And then I was an entertainment lawyer under the tutelage of Londell McMillan, and we were representing Prince, Michael Jackson, Sammy Davis Jr.'s estate. I mean, it was an amazing experience. However, living in Glenmore houses, where I was living at the time, mothers were coming up to me. My son was arrested. Guys were like, I'm being stopped and frisked 2 and 3 times a day. Well, were you arrested? No. They're just going through my pockets, slamming me up against the gate. And it was humiliating. And eventually it just got to a point where I really just couldn't take it anymore. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, then candidate, was working with Londell as he was helping her to raise resources in order for her to become the next congresswoman. And once she got elected, and she was representing Prospect Plaza, which is another place that I grew up, and it was a Hope 6 site. It was a NYCHA site, and NYCHA came to all of the residents and basically told us that we had to move out because our building was sinking, and then everyone was going to have an opportunity to return back. Years had passed, families were displaced, and people still had not gone back because there was no place to go back to. And quite frankly, it was all of these things were sort of playing itself out and playing into what I thought was my dream, but really service was at the heart of everything. I was helping at the time Congresswoman Clark to get on the ballot in March, and folk were like, "Don't give us anyone else's petitions unless you're giving me yours." I met with Deidre Oliveira and Pam Jr., and the two of them was like, "Sis, we gotta work this out." And then it was just really like a community effort where folk was just like, "Look, we have helped to create you and Alika. You guys are in law school. You're doing amazing things, and we need for you to now, come home and do what you have to do on behalf of the community." And it has been my greatest honor and my greatest privilege to represent a community that I was born and raised in, where most people in Albany, they know Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, but right here at home, most people just know Nikki.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Assemblywoman, for really sharing that. And, I love what you said about, coming home, right? There's such value and power in that, right? Not only for us personally, but also for the community. And to know that it was a community of people who believed in you and who really supported you in seeking public office. That is really tremendous. Thank you for
Oh
sharing
man,
that.
Erasma, I even remember, Jessie Hilliard, God bless her. She lived in Marcus Garvey houses. She would see my mom in the supermarket and be like, "Is Latrice Walker going to be giving us those petitions yet?" And so, I mean, it was like, I realized one day, Erasma, I looked at myself, and quite frankly, I was like supporting other people running for the seat because I just had my daughter. I was breastfeeding or pumping, and I'm like, how am I going to do all of this with this baby on my hip? I mean, the women were really just like, "You're gonna have to do this." And even there were experiences where like my boobs would be hurting, and they're like, "I don't care. You're gonna persevere, and you're gonna
There
take
you
the
go.
pain, and you're gonna get up there and speak and get on that stage and like declare your candidacy." And so, being a woman, and as you mentioned, being a mom, it has been a real treasure.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I remember my early days when co-founding, Power of Two, and talking about, the communities where we wanted to really launch. And I remember coming home. Initially, lived in the center of Brownsville, and then we moved to East New York. I remember coming home and talking to my friends, and they were like, "Listen, you got to do it here. You got to do it home. You got to do it at home, where your people are at." And I was like, you know what? You're right. And so in 2015, we were like, okay, it was a homecoming, and everyone welcomed me. Everyone, remembered me, and everyone was part of the process to make Power of Two a reality. And so I hear you. I hear you. Community
And we
really
grew up
matters.
together, right?
That's
Like we
right.
walked
That's
into
right.
this building over here, 400 Rockaway, and it was just a shell of a building, and we really made it the sort of the center of the universe with respect to support, not just politically, but also parental support, and you're really changing the dynamics of what motherhood looks like here in our neighborhood. And so we honor you.
Thank
And
you.
of course, as I always say, my regards to your father-in-law, who was like
Oh,
my
he's
mentor.
listening.
He came in and he was like, I know this, and I know the federal government, I know all of these things, and so you're
Yeah,
going to need me too. And it was just like, we are one family.
that's right. Exactly. And it is about family. And family has needs, right? And one of the things that I wanted for us to do today is really talk about, all of the pressing needs that are facing our community. And so I want to first take us back in time to our first Powering Up broadcast, which was back in like October. And during that conversation with Mirta Santana, who is now the Chief Program Officer at Riseboro Community Partnership, we talked about homelessness. At the time, right in the middle of the pandemic, she shared with me the challenges related to social distancing at shelters, the difficulties accessing broadband for remote learning for children, as well as the advocacy that she and her organization were engaged in to extend the eviction moratorium. And then we fast forward 5 months later, we had Shams DeBaron, the homeless hero. I'm sure you're familiar with Shams. And he and I talked about what he coined the homeless industrial complex, right? Which posits that the city, instead of addressing the root cause of homelessness by building, long-term affordable housing, has instead prioritized for-profit development and homeless shelters. And so this, coupled with the many reasons that individuals and families become homeless, makes eradicating homeless a really complex problem that requires holistic solutions. So I wanted to ask you, how are you prioritizing the complexity of the issue in this upcoming year?
Well, so, there's really no magic bullet, no pun intended, to
Yeah.
really be able to address all the issues that we deal with, right? Because at the center of it all is poverty. And homelessness is another symptom of what we're going through with respect to economic injustices happening in our neighborhood. And so, of course, there's a lot of affordable housing that's being built. And the number one moniker was affordable to whom? And
Mm.
so I recognize that there were a number of loopholes and situations where there would be people who could take advantage of, having access to Housing Connect when others don't because of broadband issues or because they just don't have the apparatus by which to even participate in that process. There's some people who, we are just so used to not being responded to by government. We didn't know that if you send an application on August 1st for an apartment, and then you send another one because you haven't heard from anyone on December 1st, that now that disqualifies your application so you can't gain access to it. Or housing developers who utilize the poverty statistics in our community to be able to say that most people are living below the poverty line and they're having problems with their credit at X, Y, and Z, and then turn around and use those things against you because you're not employed and you're underemployed. They turn around and use those things against you. And so we're just trying to figure out how it is that we can structure housing development and access to housing in a way that people they can't tell us no. And so one of those things is to look at doing reentry housing. A number of our community members, we know that our community is over policed. And there are people who have had brushes or interactions with the police department and they need a place to live, particularly since NYCHA was telling them, which is the only truly affordable housing in our city, that they can't come back anymore. And so we're building an initiative called the Rise, which will allow for 68 units of affordable housing for families within our community. So it's not like a glorified halfway house. It's really reuniting communities and reuniting families. We have this organization called Gamma, Grandmothers Who Are Mothers Again. And these grandmas are like, no, we want our grandchildren to be with their parents, and we're all about reuniting the family unit. Then also, we have been working with HDR in order to take a look at the situation of our mental health in our communities. Because just like Rikers Island is in addition to being whatever it is also a mental health institution, and a lot of our homeless shelters are the same. And so we have been partnering with organizations such as Canva and Riseboro and others in order to build housing that has the supportive services that are necessary for folk to get the things that they need to continue to be productive members of our community, because every other community says NIMBY, not in my backyard. But we know that these are our cousins and brothers and sisters, and we welcome you home, because at the end of the day, we know that they're going to drop these institutions in our neighborhood anyway. And so they may as well be not transitional housing, but real affordable permanent housing. And so, I have been working with my colleagues in government. I do sit on the housing committee so that we can provide the type of resources that we need. And then another thing too, sometimes when we think about homelessness, it's also a part of the system that sort of perpetuates more homelessness, because many of our families, right, we're living 2 and 3 and 4 in an apartment families in an apartment. And so we may not necessarily be homeless for homeless sake, but when we are compounding on one another like that, we have to put ourselves in a position where, you know what, in order for me to get an apartment, because I don't know how to get an apartment or won't have access to an apartment by the normal, usual route. So I have to now go and say, I'm homeless, pack up my kids, go down to path, put myself through this dehumanizing and unsafe situation, just to be able to provide a healthy and safe roof over my family's head. And so quite frankly, that, just being the only option in order to guarantee that you're going to find a place to live is just wrong. And so we're doing everything that we can to provide more opportunities, but also to be able to direct those opportunities so that it responds directly to the needs of the community, and that we don't just build opportunities for other people to gain access to.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I like the holistic approach that you're taking to tackling this issue. So I have two questions related to that. So, the mayoral candidate Eric Adams has talked about, changing the paradigm, right? So shifting it, in that instead of building or creating more shelters, transitioning hotels, the existing hotels that have housed some of the homeless population, to affordable housing units, right? So that's one thing, and I would love to get your thoughts on that. And then the second thing is, you mentioned mental health. I know that you sponsored bill number A04303, which requires the establishment of community housing waiting lists within the Office of the Mental Health Service System. And so wondering how you feel that this bill helps to bridge the gap in connecting people in need to housing opportunities.
Well, because most of the time when they enter into the transitional housing system, it's a revolving door. And the revolving door is not designed to keep you on the list, right? Because people always say, they talk about a broken criminal justice system. It's not broken. It's working the exact way that it was designed to. And I'll say the same thing about, as you mentioned, the homeless industrial complex, excuse me. And so they come up with these rules, even when you're in transitional housing. You have to be inside by 10 p.m. If you're not inside by 10 p.m., you can't get in, and you're like out of housing. And then now you got to take your family, go back to PAB, go back to the bottom of the list. And so it's a cycle that is created that you could just never get out of. And quite frankly, one of the things that we wanted to be able to do is, once you're on the list for a home, you don't lose your place in line simply because, you have to work late at night and you're not able to get home, or just live or be with your mom, at the hospital, which is certain situations that we've seen. There are emergencies that come up, and you shouldn't have to continue to go back and forth through that door without any sense of security that you're going to have a place to live. And so that's one thing. And so quite frankly, we've seen these housing lists work in the usual course of business. We have also seen when those lists get abused and people are paying in order to get on the list. And so we also created some procedural safeguards in place so that that the usual shenanigans don't happen, and where people are able to jump and bump folk out of place and in line. And so I look forward to the support of my colleagues taking place in that situation, so that people who are in mental health situations, while we are creating a lot of housing out here, that these opportunities are something that can truly become a reality. This has been worse. The homeless situation has looked like it looked when I was a kid. When I drive down Utica and Ralph Avenue, it's like, what is going on over here? And quite frankly, it's time for us to clean it up. And so, we're putting all of those organizations on notice to get your act together, because we're getting our ass together. And we're going to go up to Albany and ask that many of these contracts are repudiated in support of what our mayoral-elect Eric Adams is doing, when he's saying that we got to get these hotels and these transitional units out of here. I am in full support. And so, it's going down.
All right. You heard it here, folks. Thank you for that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and, shift our conversation to environmental racism. And that is a topic that we discussed with Selena Trowell, organizer at Vocal New York. And during our conversation, we acknowledged that there are many factors, of course, that threaten the well-being, of BIPOC communities, housing, as we discussed, being one of them. But also discriminatory policing, lack of access to quality healthcare is another. But one that often gets ignored is environmental racism. And according to an article published in the Scientific American, air pollution and extreme heat are killing inner city residents at a higher rate than almost all other causes. And for the past year and a half, residents and community organizers like Selena and the team at Vocal New York have partnered with a variety of groups across several communities to raise awareness of the negative impact that the North Brooklyn, fracked gas pipeline could potentially have on our communities and our children. And I remember that you were at the protest at Zion Triangle last year, and you recalled, I can't breathe is not a new phenomenon because, and forgive me if I'm not quoting correctly, because you said we have not been able to breathe for a long time in our communities, and that halting the pipeline is a matter of both racial and environmental justice. And I love that. And so I wanted to, here we are now a year and a half later. And so I wanted to ask you, how are you prioritizing, climate justice in our communities to make sure that this type of environmental racism doesn't continue to exist in the future? And how are you engaging community members in this conversation?
Wow. So this is great. Um, whew. So this conversation with respect to climate justice isn't a new phenomenon to me, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
So I grew up with childhood asthma. But when I had this great idea of going to law school, even before that, when I was at SUNY Purchase, I was a camp counselor for the STEP camp. And we would, test water up and down the Hudson River. We did a lot of sort of environmental projects with a number of the young people. And it really was my first eye opener into how the environment really affects our day-to-day livelihoods. And so I went to Pace Law School, which is an environmental law school. And so while I had this grandiose dream of being an entertainment lawyer, my formidable studies in the law was always about the environment. And Pace has a climate law center. I went to law school in Brazil, and we were studying the Amazon favelas and sort of the environmental justice issues that was happening with respect to the lack of water. Um, Quite frankly, we were studying SARS and the environmental effects that was having and what could be happening next. And so I've been a dirty backpacker, if you will, before these issues became in vogue. And trust me, my little sister, my niece Selena, is really and truly a sister after my own heart. And I honor her, I lift her up, and I really do everything it is that I can to make sure that the color of this conversation remains one that is foodable for us and by us.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times when I was chair of the subcommittee on renewable energy, when I got to Albany, and the environment and the room just wasn't responsive to our conversation because we were not there. Many times I would be the only woman in the room. In other situations, I'd be the only Black person in the room. And I definitely, in more situations, often than not, was the only Black woman in the room. And so I think we need to be raising up our young girls to really be more conscious. It makes me so happy when I hear even my daughter talk about climate issues now because just how in vogue it is. Initially, we were able to get $250 million from the state on the Brooklyn Queens demand management, where we've installed over 225 solar panels because we were nearing blackout rates. Like before we even get to the work that we were able to do on the North Brooklyn pipeline. some people, there was a church the other day who said to me that they have been receiving a energy bill that says none for probably about the past year, and they're like, can you reach out to Con Edison or National Grid or whoever it was who sent the bill? Maybe it was their gas bill, because we don't understand why we're getting this bill that says zero. And quite frankly, it's really based on all of the financial investments that we were able to bring to our community. So I honor all of the people who live in the Nehemiah houses to be able to say that you have been on the forefront of climate justice and climate change in our community, even when none of us knew really what we were doing at the time. Marcus Garvey Village was the first microgrid, quite frankly, not necessarily just in our community, but also in the state of New York, where we can recognize how we can come off of the grid, go into our own situation, and use lithium ion batteries to store the energy, to bring down energy costs to many of our landlords, which will hopefully be able to be translated into the rent rolls of the people in order to make their rent a lot cheaper as well. And then came the North Brooklyn Pipeline Project. It was also something that just sort of was coming of age when I first got into office.
We lost you. Yep, we lost you. We can hear you, we can see you, but we can't hear you. Your audio is still gone. Team, can we support in any way to get her audio back on?
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
I'm good.
Okay, awesome.
I don't know, out there in Facebook land, if you can hear me, please don't call me. So the North Brooklyn Pipeline, there was a great sister who came and met with me about that early on, both Alika and I, to talk about the fact that this project and the potential dangers of what could happen here. And when that was the case, we began our advocacy in Albany through the Public Service Commission. Again, I was still also chair of the Committee on Renewable Energy at the time. And the project had different portions of it. And, there's an adage to saying when the people united can never be defeated. And quite frankly, it was when the people of our community really began to organize to say, oh, hell no, that I was able to have the support mechanisms that were necessary when we were having these conversations. And quite frankly, a number of my colleagues in government who are also very serious about energy and climate justice initiatives. We wrote letters, some collectively and some on our own, to the PSC to voice our dismay with this project. We also reached out to the mayor because there were some permits on the project that allowed it to move forward, and we knew that the mayor could just pull these permits. And Vocal has always been an important project, important partner to me through the work that we've done through our criminal justice reform initiatives. And so it was a no-brainer that we were on the same page with respect to this initiative as well. And then ultimately, one of the last telephone calls that I made to the PSC and to National Grid, they were just like, you know what, we're pulling the project. And it was a true victory. Gabriel, all of the folk who are, a lot more, a little younger and a lot more energetic than, sometimes I am, even though I'm only 42, but, I look at them and I'm just like, I used to be cute too, but anyway, it's just great because when you see your community be empowered and just know that it's not just about going into a voting booth once or twice a year, but that when you put people in office, every other community holds their elected officials accountable, and not just hold them accountable to the point where you do what you say you're going to do, but when we're doing, to be able to say, look, I know this sister is out here doing the work, and if y'all are not responding to her because we support her, then now we're going to start calling you out as well. And that, type of community engagement and empowerment and coalition building ultimately led us to a point where we were victorious in that situation, but we can't rest on the laurels of success. Right. We know that in many instances, just like we've seen with respect to the closures of schools, they'll say, yeah, we're going to close it for now. And then as soon as you're not looking anymore, they'll go right back to it. And so, again, it has really come full circle for me. But I'm very honored, and I hopefully out of that comes some more other individuals as well who would be interested in going to Pace Law School, so that we can have a lot more Erin Brockoviches in our world, and so that when these folk aren't listening to you, as opposed to using the microphone and the bullhorn as your bully pulpit, you can take them and fight them from the streets of Brownsville to the halls of justice as well.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious if bill number 807406, which directs the Public Service Commission to modify the objectives of the Clean Energy Fund for reduction of air pollution, if this legislation is applicable to the North Brooklyn pipeline, right? Because
It's
folks
applicable.
are still out there, fighting against this because the harms. The potential harm is real.
Well, you know what, the other side to it as well is I have a certain level of healthy skepticism about anything and anyone that comes into our community, because we've always seen folk interested in Brownsville because it's sexy for the moment. Is you're able to get resources, and so you come in, you do some work, you eventually get another job, and then we don't know anything else about the program anymore. And so, the same thing applies here in many of these circumstances as well. And so part of I always tell people whenever we see a lot of these movements come of age, sometimes look behind the movement and see where the money is coming from. Just like you do when it comes to elected officials, you follow the money, with a lot of these other groups as well, because that helps you to understand why it is that they're doing and they're fighting so hard the way that they are. And with respect to just sort of air pollution, which is, I think, the thing that even when we have these conversations about the North Brooklyn pipeline and other things, it's like, hold on a second, Linden Boulevard hurts us a whole lot more, right? Because it's a roadway where trucks are going back and forth. Particulate matter is being exposed. We have noticed that in that same area around Linden Boulevard, Riverdale, are some of the highest incidences of asthma in children than any other community. And so I will always sort of raise, my voice to be able to say that while we have been victorious in this situation, that there are a lot of other issues that we need to be working on, like taking a look at the fact that that highway is traveling straight through our communities and hurting our families and hurting our babies. And so the Clean Energy Fund and the Community Climate and Protection Act left particulate matter off the table. Why? Because most of the highways go through communities like the South Bronx and like in Brownsville. And at the end of the day, the trucking industry is very, very powerful to be able to say, okay, all of this stuff is really, really good. And we'll do all of these things to outfit our trucks, but just take this piece out of it. And so, again, we have to look behind the curtain a lot of times to really be able to see why in these perfect, outstanding, gold standard bills are we still fighting for our existence to be able to make sure that those bills speak to the particular issues that we are espousing that are hurting our communities the most. And so that's why I introduced that particular bill to really to make sure that this particular act, which is very important, also takes a look at the pollution that happens in our neighborhood. We also have a water crisis in NYCHA. People talk a lot about lead paint, but it's like, hey, there's lead in the paint, but in many instances, the lead in the paint really gets exposed if it's like, if it's messed with. And that's when it really becomes the bigger problem. Not that it's not a problem, just it's sheer existence. But we drink water each and every day in our schools and in our homes. And so we also have to be very concerned about the lead in our water conversation. We saw what was happening up in the Bronx with Legionnaire's disease. We have to take a look at our water too. And so again, you see a lot of passion that comes from me with respect to environmental justice issues. It's because, in the background, other communities are talking about this. But in our community, folk just aren't, they're not raising the platform to be able to say, I know we're on this in this area, but we need to take our voice to Brownsville as well. And so, if any of those folk are listening to, we need your help with a myriad of environmental and social justice issues.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, the North Brooklyn pipeline is one of many of the issues that, are concerning for the community. And I think that the emphasis on it is because there is a level of understanding about the existing pollution that is impacting our community's health. As you said, in public housing, on the highways, et cetera. And so it's trying to do away with, this new nascent program that is just going to compound the existing issues, within the environmental issues. And so I think it's not ignoring those other issues. It's saying we understand and we're working on these. And we also want to stop this before it becomes one of these long-standing problems that we have to contend with. So, I think it's a combination of all of those things. I want us to shift a bit from environmental, racism and its impact on health to the broader topic of health in our communities. And, last year in the midst of the pandemic, I saw you and your team, actively engaged in helping our residents access masks and advocating for, the opening of COVID testing sites, and then ensuring that those sites also began to provide vaccines. And it was ever more apparent to those of us in the community that the health system is, ill-equipped to respond to our needs because it too is struggling to address the inequities that exist based on race and ethnicity. And this is something that we discuss very openly with Dr. Julian Watkins, who is the clinical assistant to the ICS Deputy Incident Commander at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And so we wanted to ask a couple of questions. So the one is, what are your thoughts on the important work that our health system needs to do to acknowledge the harmful history and foster real trust going forward? And then secondly, how are you, having grown up in Brownsville and now being an advocate, how are you reimagining what health looks like for our community?
So, again, it's like there's so many different ways to address this and handle it. And I think one of the things that I love the most too about being in the assembly is that no 2 days are the same. And so I can pick one thing that we worked on, but the list just is never ending, and it really it's just about whatever the fire is of the day that we have to put out. But one of the things that we've done, I can say that I remember my first day at the State of the State in the Assembly in 2015. Before that, I'll back up a little bit. When I worked for Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, New York State had owed the federal government about $7 billion in its Medicare reimbursement funds. And there was really no way that New York State was going to be able to recoup those resources. And remember, Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement are mostly coming from our safety net hospitals, such as Brookdale, Interfaith, Kingsbrook, Kings County, Downstate, et cetera. And the DOH had put out this proposal that different states could apply to in order to get a Medicaid waiver so that they don't have to pay those funds back, and that they can take those monies and invest them into the local healthcare infrastructure. I worked with a sister who was working for Senator Schumer at the time. I was working for Congresswoman Yvette Clarke and DOH, the federal government, Department of Health. And we were ultimately New York's application for a federal Medicaid waiver through the support and help and assistance of our federal legislators. We're able to get a $7 billion Medicaid waiver, which allowed for that investment to happen in our communities. And again, working for the Congresswoman, transitioned into a member of the Assembly. I know what we had just done over there, so I was following the money on day one. And we had this, crazy ass working with the folk who were then the leaders at Brookdale to be able to say that we wanted $700 million for Brookdale Hospital. We recognized that Brookdale was so important because it was like the heartbeat of healthcare in our community. We do have a lot of clinics and different things, but this is the trauma place. A lot of times, if you are in an emergency situation, you can try to see if an ambulance will take you to Kings County or this place or that place. But if they can't get there, you're going to Brookdale. And we needed to make sure that our hospital represented the best of the best in healthcare that any community, any other community deserves. We should have it at our home too. And so I remember there were some of my colleagues who came on the floor of the assembly, and he said, it was a number of women who was elected when I got elected. And he says, all you women are so new that you don't know what you can't ask for. And he was exactly right? Because he walking in the door talking about we want $700 million. And it's like monopoly money because I'd never, I had a hard time seeing $700 not to mention to do that. And that money was initially to be used as dowry in order to get another hospital, bigger, better system to come and partner in with Brookdale. Ultimately, it became what we now know of as One Brooklyn Health. And the $700 million initiative grew from $700 million to $1.4 billion. But at the end of the day, our eyes was always on the prize. And the $700 million that we had hoped for that would come to Brookdale ultimately resulted in $612 million in our very own community hospital. I just did the tour the other day. The ICU unit is brand new. It's state of the art. You don't have to touch anything. If you look to see where the nurses stations are set up in relation to the patients, I mean, I think it was amazing. And I thought that this had to be a priority because under COVID, when we were trying to get more of our patients to be relocated over at St. Mary's Hospital, which is now like a nursing home rehabilitation center, we were able to get them a contract to be a COVID center where people can be intubated, or if they were being released from ICU, this could be like a step down place. And they were telling us that, oh no, we were bringing our own patients from this other hospital in South Brooklyn, as opposed to being responsive to the folk who are right next door. And we needed to make sure that not only did we have the beds that we needed there, but that we had the beds that we needed in Brookdale Hospital as well. And so if you have not taken a tour of the ICU unit at Brookdale, I'm not sure when they're scheduled to open up, but please do reach out to their community relations group and get over there to see some of the work that's being done. And we're not stopping there. The emergency room is next. One of the issues is that the emergency room and the operating room are on two separate floors. And we need to have some level of continuity because any moment is a critical moment in healthcare. And we don't want to lose people on the elevator, which happened in so many other instances, and including, I remember having to see my own brother in the lobby because, not making it upstairs due to his 9 gunshots in his back. And so I knew that, it was important. So not only are we redoing the emergency room, but there will be two operating rooms located adjacent to the ER. And the operating rooms are being redone. And I said I was 42. I don't know how many others of you who are out there who have not had a mammogram yet. But you can go to Brookdale Hospital now, go to see, all of the work and the investment that we've done there. There is a state-of-the-art heart apparatus that I'm still learning all of the, freaky deaky healthcare terminology for. But I know that it's amazing, and I know that it's necessary for any of you who have had a heart attack, have heart concerns, have high blood pressure. That is also another thing that you should really get to. Many of your faith-based organizations, you can set up a time in order to come and do a tour of all of the amazing things that we've done. And then with BMS through Vital Brooklyn, they're going to be building out another state-of-the-art healthcare medical clinic facility. It's where I got my immunization shots. And so there's going to be housing up above. They're also going to be partnering up with the location that's over at Van Dyke Houses and be in that particular center. And so one of the biggest issues was that our healthcare electronic system just didn't speak to one another. Because number one, our broadband is a huge problem, right? So going back to poverty being at the center of anything. And when it rains too hard, none of us have internet service, including myself here. And I'm sure you went through this as well, Erasma, here in the office, that we're still on copper wires. And so Verizon, if you are listening, again, everyone is on notice that this train has already left the station and that either you're going to have to shit or get off the pot. But we have to continue on the momentum that we're going in. Brownsville is bigger, bolder, badder than ever before. And so if folk were scared of us back in the days, now that we are equipped and we are empowered, I think our zhuzh has just been increased that much more. And so we're investing in that. We're seeing new healthcare facilities pop up along in our communities, and we're making sure that they have the monies and the resources that they have in order for folk to be able to get the vital access to quality healthcare related jobs as well. And so partnering with, of course, with 1199 and DC 37 and all of the healthcare workers, we need to, shore up our community, not to just make these investments in our infrastructure, but that we're also investing in our people so that they can have access to working in these great environments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think now the community is, definitely well versed on what's available. And I really do appreciate that, a lot of your focus has been not just the expansion, but also making sure that there's quality, services provided in the hospitals that are in our community, and that we have access to that. So thank you. We have received a couple of questions related to health, particularly the vaccines. Let me see here. One is from Ms. Bannister. Ms. Bannister, thank you. It has been rumored that the police are not required to take the COVID vaccine, but the city has stipulated employers mandate their employees or they would be terminated. What is your take on this? How can this impact community policing? That is from Ms. Bannister. Assemblywoman?
So police officers are not required, quite frankly, and I'm not, so much of a conspiracy theorist, but I just think that the same way that they were rolling out the vaccine and testing in the past, and that, it was this particular group, and in that particular group, I think eventually we will see, the healthcare question come up with respect to the fact that everyone may be mandated for the vaccine, just like it is with, chicken pox. I mean, when I was growing up, there wasn't even a chicken pox vaccine. And so when they wanted to give that to my daughter, I was like, a chicken pox vaccine. And, it was something I was, even myself very skeptical of. But when the opportunity came for me to become vaccinated, I jumped at it. But I also understand, I always remember in a healthcare law class that this was one of the biggest sort of legal questions in healthcare with respect to these medical mandates. And so with respect to community policing, I think that, the same way that our healthcare workers are frontline workers, our teachers are frontline workers, people who are engaged in everyday interactions with the public have a duty and a responsibility by which to protect our communities. I know, it's like most people are saying, okay, well, I'll get tested once a week. But eventually, one thing that I notice about government, like sprinkers turn on and sprinkers turn off. And while there's money now to pay for people to be tested once a week, there will be a day where that spigot is going to turn off because we're going to have to make a determination as to whether or not we're going to provide food or we're going to invest in testing the way that we've had. And then really having this conversation with our federal representatives to be able to say, that COVID money shouldn't just be a one-shot deal, but we should always be getting it. And so I think that ultimately, we're going to have to answer some real hard questions with respect to what industries will be getting vaccinated. But I do also understand that there are a number of scenarios where there are just too many questions about the vaccination. And so I do still believe that people should have the option of making the choices that they want with respect to our health care, because we have the Constitution here in the United States. But our constitutional rights are not unfettered. And so if there are situations that we've seen in the past that conflicts with public protection, we have seen the Supreme Court rule that our constitutional rights to, freedom, liberty, justice, equality, et cetera, will be curtailed in order to meet the public good. And so I think that this is a conversation that will play itself out up until the highest court in the land. I will be closely following it. But again, I am in no position, and quite frankly, I'm glad I don't have to make that decision at this point, at this moment, at least. You never know what God has in store. He's still in the business of raising up new leaders, and you never know. But at this point in time, I'm watching, taking notes, listening to the science, listening to the advocates, hearing people out on both ends of the spectrum with respect to this conversation. And I think that as we're learning to live in this new normal, we continue to do what we have to do to keep ourselves safe. So continue practicing, social distancing. Wear your mask. I was in an indoor situation today and I kept my mask on, even though apparently everyone there was vaccinated, including myself. But I am seeing that people who are vaccinated are still contracting COVID-19. And so I just don't know which direction to go. And I am blessed to be able to say I have not had COVID. And I'd like to keep it that way, because while some folk are concerned about the effects that the vaccine is going to have on them, we don't know what the effects are that, having lived with COVID will have on you as well. And so in some instances, it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But I will be watching. I do hear your question, Ms. Bannister, and I will look to have conversation with respect to our police force as to whether or not, what are the circumstances on vaccinations and what protocols are they putting in place to keep our community safe.
Wonderful. Thank you, Assemblywoman. Ms. Bannister, thank you for the question. It is a very important one. And we will certainly have some follow-up discussions about that in particular. We received another question here related also to vaccination. The mayor has forced, and I don't know who it's from, Andrew, if you know who it's from, put it in the chat for me, please. The mayor has forced the city to go back to school and back to work without consideration of vaccines provided for everyone. Children who have yet to be vaccinated are being exposed now. Was the mayor's decision premature? Where do you stand regarding this matter?
I think so, yes. I was down in South Carolina recently. My uncle passed. And, there's public schools opened up without a remote option. And then they quickly closed. And we saw just, recently, one of the best shows on Broadway, Aladdin, opened up and then quickly closed. And so I do believe that a remote option should have remained available to our students. It should have been, phased in over time. We just have the most groundbreaking education budget in 2021 that we have seen in a long time, or maybe in our own lifetime. I think that the resources were necessary in order to help us get to where we need to go and really to roll out a remote learning option that's bar none. Quite frankly, there are a number of students who really, flourished in that environment. But I also know that it's tough because as a working mom and a single mom, I had to, I got to figure out how do I juggle both, right? Like providing the mass and food, et cetera, in our community, but at the same time, making sure that I'm learning how to add and subtract fractions with unequal denominators, right? And so I know how difficult that is on parents. And so parents of essential workers or people who have to get to work, should have an option of whether or not they want to, put their kid in school. But I absolutely believe that there should have been a remote option with respect to the education of our children. And look, if you're interested in doing like homeschooling, I met some parents over the summer who were educators themselves, and they're just like, you know what, I'm coming out of this. I'm going to educate my child at home. I give it up to those parents as well. And quite frankly, this is a new norm for us, and we're really just all trying to figure it out. And so the more options I believe people have to work with, the better off we'd be.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the question, whoever submitted it. And thank you,
I know,
Assemblywoman
right?
Walker, for your response. I mean, I agree with you that the remote options should have been available. And I also believe that our educational system needed to be better prepared for those that were ready to come back, and not just, the physical, potential physical issues of like contracting COVID, but also the emotional, impact that lockdown and the continuous messaging around COVID has had on children, right? And their capacity for learning, and making sure that the educational system is equipped to manage and support children through that trauma. I'm not sure that it has been prepared. I know that we have, a few more minutes, and I feel like there's so many other topics that we talked about throughout the year, particularly around community safety. And I really want to make sure that we tackle that. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the Biden and Harris administration's Rescue Plan Act. And we had the conversation about the Rescue Plan Act with Riza Rodriguez, who is Associate Executive Director for Policy and Advocacy over at the Citizens Committee for Children. And during that talk, we drilled down into, the details of the plan and the impact that it could have on families, and the, potential reduction on the poverty rate. In your press release, Assemblywoman, you called for a war on poverty. The Assembly Majority's Families First agenda was highlighted in that press release. And that agenda includes increasing funding for schools, access to affordable healthcare, and housing that ensures a living wage for all New Yorkers. So we're curious, what are your thoughts on the provisions of the stimulus bill and tax credits, and how they address or fail to address the needs of community families?
Wow. So again, as a single mom, the bill sort of speaks to me as an assembly member, but it speaks to me just as a woman, and it speaks to me as a mom. I think that many of us are still living in a situation where we can be classified as the working poor, where we work hard 80 hours a week, and still make just enough money to be broke.
Mm.
And we are seeing a situation where the cost of food is rising in our neighborhood. Um, um, our access to food sometimes just becomes non-existent, and rent doesn't go down. I mean, now we're going through an opportunity where we're going through the rent moratorium, extending that, changing up dynamics with respect to our court system, providing access for people to apply for rental assistance. And sometimes that was a little disastrous with respect to the federal monies that came, and having to go through the red tape and the bottlenecking of government, so that people aren't getting access to the resources that they need, and fearing whether or not they're going to have a roof over their head. And then also, with respect to paying your rent. We were already paying upwards of 50% of our income on rent. So we were already rent burdened when they said, you should only pay 30%, but we're exceeding that, where we'd have to say, to landlords in many instances, I'll pay you this amount out of this check, and this amount, on the next go round. I thought that the stimulus package was something that at least, it wasn't, of course, it wasn't something that was gonna, make you rich, but it made life a little bit more manageable for that month. And that, wherever the levels it was that your family was at, that it was 100% helpful. And then when the round of stimulus checks came, again, it did the same thing. But quite frankly, people were saying, "Oh, folk are getting their stimulus checks and then they're going out and they're going to get the red bottoms." Yes, some people may have done that, but most of our families were going to get red peppers, right? And it's like, don't sit here and stereotype type people who are the most neediest and have the least access to food as to being so shallow, that's what we would go and run and do. Whether or not some folk were doing that, if they did, they stimulated the economy. And quite frankly, we needed that type of injection too. And so many instances, folk, really wanted you to go out and spend the money on whatever the circumstances are. And some people are holding on to it for a rainy day. I'll never forget one time I had a conversation with someone who said their family didn't have life insurance. And so they don't know if they needed that money in order to bury their loved one, right? And so there are many different circumstances where those resources really came in handy. This child care tax credit, the only thing I keep telling people I want folk to be mindful of is that while it's amazing to be able to get support from the government every month to be able to help you out, because a lot of folks are sitting at home waiting for those child support checks and never show up. And so now, Big Brother is out here, looking out. And it's extremely helpful because school just passed. I don't know if your kid eats like my kid eats, but she eats all day long. And I have a hard time just even taking care of, her lunch budget. And those resources are extremely helpful. And so I say all of these things to say, that again, what I love the most about my job is that what people are going through is like Tuesday for me. And so I hear you, and we have to fight for a whole lot more. But whenever we've done our taxes and we've got the child care tax credit at the end of the year, we have to be cognizant of the fact that now, instead of it being at the end of the year, that they're being parsed out to us over the course of time. And so we have to know sort of where this isn't. A lot of times this doesn't become new money. It's just resources that have been shifted around. And then for folk who, women are the fastest growing group of folk who have taken out student loans. And so this like moratorium on student loans, I think, has also been, incredible. I love the fact that I was able to go to law school, but my student loan payments are $892 a month. Right. And everyone knows exactly, what our salary is. And so when you take a look at that and you can able to see that, okay, you got student loans, you got this, you got that. People are having a hard time surviving, even folk who we don't even believe would be. And so I look forward to continuing the work or working with the Biden-Harris administration on making sure that families are put first and that we're able to have the resources that we need. And again, I really and truly feel like at the core of everything that's happening, poverty is our biggest issue. And quite frankly, it's generational, right? And so while I have been able to, and many working people have been able to come through poverty. I was talking to someone last night that, I remember my Medicaid card. Quite frankly, I still even have the card for like the food stamps that they gave me when I first started in college. And then they told me that I was going to have to go and clean up the park for my workforce study or whatever, my workforce program. And I may not reap the benefits of going off to college and setting myself to sort of become a member of the middle class. But it is my hope that all of the struggle that I've done, even though I may not feel it in my lifetime, but to be able to ensure that my daughter does. And I think that we're all living to just make sure that generationally we are living our children and our legacy in a better place tomorrow than we experience today. And so by putting families first, it'll at least put us on a platform. You don't have to make things equal for all of us, but when you make things equitable, that's when you make a difference. I may not need, we all may not need $10. Some of us may need 20, some of us may need 5, but to meet people where they are and to meet families where they are, so that we don't have to deal with the same economic injustices that our grandmothers and grandfathers had to go through. There's a sister who just said to me, even at Brookdale, that she's making a certain amount of money, but the male counterpart in her same position made almost $100,000 more than she made. That is unreal. And that level of systematic injustices are hopefully things that'll be addressed by Lily Ledbetter and all of the women's equality initiatives that we're putting forth in Albany, and that we're making sure that the small businesses and small business needs and loans and access to capital that folk need in order to take their business to the next level, right? Sometimes people don't necessarily need a handout, but they do need a leg up, right? And so, and I think that that's what this budget was about. Providing the educational resources that we need that will level out the playing field in our access to quality education. We know that those lawsuits were taking place. We were screaming out, working with AQE, give us the money that our families are owed, our children are owed. That money is now available to us. And so I think that this is the civil rights issue of our time. And we are in a unique place to really be able to, set the world on fire. And again, I may not be the person who see us get there, but I am confident, Erasma, that your boys, my little girl, and all of the babies who are out there are really going to be the beneficiaries of what we're fighting for in these days, during these unprecedented economic times, to be able to be proud of the fact that they could stand on our shoulders and through all of our hard work, to be able to say that they are victorious, and I'll be looking down and smiling down and proud of the work and the legacy that we've created, and through all of your great work in terms of really raising up parenting, babies, and everyone else in our neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, there's an indigenous proverb that says that, we're borrowing the land, from, our children, right? And so what we do in this moment, really matters, right? And not just, at the family level, but at the community level, and even as a nation, right? And globally. So that it's really important that we do right. And, as part of this particular conversation, I want to make sure that for all of our families who are, from Brownsville, from East New York, from the South Bronx, y'all need to get access to that child tax credit. I was just looking at a heat map, earlier this week that showed that there were thousands of people that still haven't accessed that. And, I want to make sure that if you have questions, for those of you listening, if you have any doubt whatsoever about the process of accessing, the child tax credit, if you have issues navigating the process or whatever, that you give us a call. So people in the Bronx, please call our office at 516-534-5119 to get all your questions answered related to the CTC. And Brooklyn, 516-636-3204. Give us a call and we'll help you navigate the process. I will also say, everybody knows what's happening in, at the national level right now in government, right? In Congress. And right now they're looking at the federal reconciliation package. And if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to please call the White House and your representatives to make sure that they are able to expand the child tax credit for another 5 years and that it remains a priority. And so the number for the White House, write it down, 202-456-1111, 202-456-1111. Want to make sure that I plug those things. Assemblywoman Walker, I know that I've kept you over time. And so I am appreciative of you staying with us. And, I have a bunch of other questions, but I'll hold on to those for another opportunity for us to reconnect. But I do want to ask you, what are your parting words to the folks that are listening? What is your call to action in this moment that we find ourselves, as a community and as a nation?
Well, I will say, in accordance with the federal bin that and advocacy that you just did, that we passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and making sure that voting is accessible and efficient and progressive. We have seen all the movies. We've watched Eyes on the Prize. We know the story of Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the March on Washington, and all of those amazing things, the beautiful songstress Mahalia Jackson. But that was an episode in our lifetime. But the series continues, and now the impetus is on us to make sure that we're doing everything it is that we can do to make sure that we are protecting our precious right to vote. Because this conversation has been around about politics, right? We're talking about everyday needs, everyday circumstances, gun violence, healthcare, education, raising families, early childhood education, education in our school system. All of these things are connected to the franchise. And so when you don't vote, you don't count. When you don't fill out your census, you don't count. We're going through redistricting right now, and the numbers that get used is voting age population. Whether or not you completed your census is how we're able to even know that you exist. And quite frankly, I'm out here saying that I need $100 for 100 kids because we could find them. But if there's actually 1,000 kids, how do we know that they're even there? And so we have to, as a community, as a community of family, you know how we do. We are cousins and nephews and god sisters and god brothers, whether or not there's a drop of blood in common between us. And so, yes, I do consider you to be family. There was a eureka moment that I recognized about voting and elected officials and politics that made me say, you know what? Girl, you got to get in this. And being in it is really how we take care of our communities. And so election day is coming upon us again. There will be 5 ballot questions on the back. Make sure that you are flipping your ballot and answering those questions. Because a lot of times, they'll put these things on the back and expecting that us not to flip them over or not to really know what's going on there. So maybe Erasma, that can be our next opportunity to connect. I know we have maybe about a month, like a little over a month, in order to get that situation together. So maybe we can do some things. I am the chair of the election law committee in the assembly. And there are these 5 ballot measure items that will be on the ballot. I'll put them maybe online on this because I don't have them all in front of me right now. Many of them deal with the Climate and Community Protection Act and expanding access there. Some of them deal with voting and no absentee balloting, so that now they were using COVID as an opportunity to just send you your ballot at home. Now you don't have to say, I'm not in county, I'm this. You can have access to that same day voter registration. You can show up at the poll, register to vote and vote. And so there are a number of changes that are healthy changes for our neighborhood that we really need your input in. So it's not just about, we voted on it already in the legislature, and now they're on the ballot as a referendum because your vote and your voice matter. And so let's raise that up. I want to see that George Floyd bill get passed because policing in our community is of vital importance. I know we just saw, I think his name was Nathaniel Hayward, I know it's his name, from Gowanus houses. When I was, a youngin' out in Gowanus, I remember him playing cops and robbers on the roof on the other side and being gunned down by a police officer because he had a toy gun. And my daughter and I were outside when Kwesi was gunned down by a police officer. And so we have to do something about that as well. But again, it's really going to be through our vote. So please don't forget that. I am Assembly Member Latrice Walker. My office is located at 400 Rockaway Avenue. We're on the second floor. And the telephone number to our office is 718-342-1256, 718-342-1256. And on social media, you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook. I think I even got TikTok too, at The Real Latrice Walker. And if you're on the Peloton, like, go to The Real Latrice, because I'm on this this fitness challenge where I'm ready for a healthier me. Thank you, Erasma, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblywoman Walker. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing, your vision and your thoughts on our community. I want to give a shout out to all of our previous guests: Kamara Jackson, Keston Jones, Kelly Young, Joanza Williams, Danielle Thorpe, Melisha Jackman, Naima Oyo, Timothy Sutton. I didn't forget you all. We have lots of questions related to the topics that we discussed. Unfortunately, we ran out of time today, but don't worry. We'll get to those eventually.
I will come back. I tried to incorporate some of the answers to those questions into some of the things that I mentioned. But again, we're going to be out here. We're going to do Cure Violence. Kamara, I know we got, midnight basketball going. Amazing work at Brookdale Hospital. And so to all of our folk and to all of our partners, I'm here. I'm not an industry chick. I'm an industries chick. And so I'm going to definitely see each and every one of you, out here in these streets. And if you want to go live on the drop of the dime, I look forward to that too. And Erasma, you are doing amazing work. And I haven't figured out anything yet in terms of really just highlighting all of the great people who we have on the ground, but we're going to have to definitely make sure when it's safe for us to get back together, that we all do a big gala and get out here and really just lift up and honor our own real leaders and pretty much give each and every one of you your flowers while we can.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. To all of you watching and listening, I will leave you, me and my quotes. So I will leave you from a quote from Carl Schultz, who was U.S. Senator, I believe, in 1871. And he was one of the people that really helped to influence Abraham Lincoln around emancipation. And he said during his speech in 1871, "Our country, right or wrong, when right, to be kept right, and when wrong, to be set right." So let's set our nation right, folks, starting with our communities. In the meantime, stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Take care.